Good morning. Thank you, Dennis. Let me tell you a story. I remember when I had to take my driving test to get my driver's license. I met up with the teacher, I got in the car, I did the thing, and I came back and I told my friends, and they asked me, "So, did you pass?" I said, "No." "Oh, you failed?" "No." "What happened?" "Well, you probably can't figure it out, but I never expected this to happen. I got in the car, sat down with the driving instructor. In fact, he was outside the car. And what you have to do before you even drive away and do the test is you have to show that you know how to use the lights, right? So the driver instructor's like, okay, turn on your four-ways and turn on your blinkers and this and that. And it didn't work. The lights in the driving instructor's car didn't work. And so, okay, I guess we just have to cancel and go out to Tim Hortons. But I neither passed nor failed, although I did pass eventually. And part two of that test is the written test, the rules of the road, the signs. And I'm going to show you a sign right now, and you have to tell me if you can identify it, because this is the one I did not get. Probably seen it all over the place, but can you actually articulate what that sign means? I didn't get it right, but I never will forget it now. There's a hazard. That's what it means, okay? That's right, if you're paying attention, if you're young here. So you got to look at the direction of the lines. If they're sloping down to the left or to the right, you have to follow the line sloping down. And right here, you have to go to the left of the sign. I'll never forget that one. And why am I telling you about signs? Is because signs, the word sign is what John calls the 7 miracles in his gospel. That's what we're preaching on this winter. I know that's a little bit of a roundabout way, pun intended, to get to the point. But we've arrived here. Let's look at these 7 signs. Bring up the 7 signs, please. So there we are. We're number 3. We've had turning water into wine, healing the nobleman's son. And today, feel free to open to John chapter 5, healing the man at the pool. No other gospel writer calls these signs. And so I ask you to ponder, why does John call these 7 miracles signs? Because the English word sign is a confusing one, and any of the people here that are in our English class will tell you this because, like many words in English, the word sign has multiple meanings. You can talk about a sign like the one I just showed you, where it's a physical marker or it's some object that's telling you about something else. Or you can use the word sign to mean a miracle, like when we talk about signs and wonders. Ever notice that those two words are the same? And that's a little bit confusing in English. It's confusing in Greek too, because when John wrote his gospel, he used the word signs in Greek, and that also has both meanings. But the people who read that text, they understood what John was getting at. These signs, these miracles, point to something. They point to a deeper reality. All 7 of these signs point to something true about Jesus. Dare I say something different with each one? So the question today, as we open to John chapter 5, is what is this sign pointing to? What is this story telling us about Jesus? Let's set the scene. In his 3 years of ministry, Jesus went to many dark, difficult, miserable places. But to me, there is one that stands out as darker, as more difficult, and more miserable than any other place that he went during his time of ministry. We're told there was a big festival happening in Jerusalem. So Jesus brings his disciples to the city, as was the custom, part of the regular pilgrimage there. And the only place that we're told that he takes them is the pool. Not for swimming. It's called the Pool of Bethesda. And Jesus takes his disciples to the Pool of Bethesda. It's actually a real place, as you can imagine. I have a picture here that I'll show you. It's been recovered by archaeologists. Keep going. There it is. This is actually, it's hard to imagine, but there will be different rooms, different colonnades, pools with steps down into them. And it's a real place that you can actually go visit today. And I don't know about you, but when I see a picture like that, it really helps me imagine the setting. These are the bricks that Jesus would have touched and walked on as he went to the Pool of Bethesda. The pool is right next to the temple, right downtown, and there were tons of people there, but only certain kinds of people. I'm guessing that for most people in the city, either the regulars or the tourists, this was not a place where they went regularly. We all can think of those places, perhaps in Halifax, places where there's a lot of people there, but yeah, I'm not going. I'm not going. I'm not going because it just makes me a little sad or uncomfortable. There's something about this place that has a bad reputation. I wouldn't want to get caught rubbing shoulders with the wrong people. It's kind of, this is that kind of place. That's what the pool of Bethesda was. People don't go there to visit. No, people don't go for a quick trip to the pool of Bethesda. When they go, they stay for a long time. If you were to visit the pool of Bethesda, that's what you'd see. Great masses of people all around and all with something in common. They all had a disability. They all had disability. Some were blind. Some could not walk or even move at all. Some had skin diseases, perhaps mental health afflictions, tremendous difficulties in life, and they're all here at the pool. And that is not, let me be clear, that is not what made this a dark or difficult or miserable place. What made the pool of Bethesda a miserable place was the pool. Something strange would happen to this pool on occasion. I don't know how often, daily, monthly, once a year, but superstition had it that an angel would come and stir up the waters, make them bubble up. And when that happened, if you were the first person in the water, imagine the competition here. If you were the first person in the water, you'd be healed. I can't tell you whether this is true or not. I have a hunch that this was not true, but I can't prove that. Whether this was true or not, the idea, the hope, had a terrible grip on people. People would camp out there for days, weeks, years, hoping desperately to be the first person in the water when it next got stirred up, whether that was tomorrow, next year, or if you look away, right now, don't look away. Don't look away. There are places and things that have this effect in our culture too, isn't there? Ideas that have a hold on people's hearts that provide them with a false hope. I don't want to knock on any one thing in particular, but some of the ideas are obvious. The lottery. I'm not claiming there's anything inherently bad about the lottery, but it can have a grip on people's lives and hearts and minds. I think of get-rich-quick schemes, promises that tomorrow, if you just become an affiliate for Amazon, or you invest in crypto, or buy my beauty products, or take this self-help course that'll end up sucking you dry of all your money and time. If you do this, you'll be happy, you'll be well, you'll be successful. I think of influencer culture that leads to comparison and anxiety and vanity. I think of the relentless drive of capitalism that promises us with the next dollar, you'll finally make it. I think of toxic relationships, political movements, religious legalism. We see it all around us. The things that promise shortcuts to happiness, health, and success. That is what we want, though. The shortcut. And when there is a promising chance like success, healing, comfort, we can be so quick to jump at it. Because what if it's true? What if this time they're telling the truth? That's why advertisements can be so effective. They take advantage of us, of the part of us that wants a promise to the easy way. What's even worse is ads that take advantage of our fear of missing out. Think of the fear of missing out for the person sitting by the pool, and if they turn their eyes away, they might not be in the water first, and they might never be healed after all. It preys on people's vulnerabilities. I don't want to make too fine a point of this comparison, but I definitely sense a psychological connection between whatever's going on at the pool and the part of us that wants that easy, quick fix. The miracle fix. I think it's this urge that explains why in this story we find a man who's been sitting at the pool maybe his entire life. He's been paralyzed for 38 years. I don't know. How long had he been there? I think we're supposed to imagine it's been a long, long time. And certainly, we cannot fault him for that. He wants to be healed. The depth of his pain and loneliness, his misery is likely unspeakable. And I don't say this because he has a disability necessarily. God knows our friends with disability can teach us so much about resilience and joy. I think this man's misery is acute because of what else we know about him. He's been waiting and waiting, perhaps at first excitedly, and then restlessly, now maybe even hopelessly by the pool, day after day, year after year, 20 years, 30 years. He has an ache in his soul, a longing that's gone unfulfilled for decades. Until today. Until the moment Jesus decides to take his disciples to the pool during the festival on the Sabbath day. It's at this moment that I want to pause and draw your attention, if you have the handout, to your handout, because there's 2 QR codes in there. One of them will take you to a video clip of a dramatic retelling of the story from the show The Chosen. It really helps you enter into the story. I suggest you watch that when you get home, not right now. The other is a QR code that takes you to a podcast where it discusses disability and the theology of disability, because disability is something that we perhaps have a lot of unstated and unanalyzed beliefs about when it comes to our faith, but it's worth entering into the experience of someone who's thought this out a little bit more than I have. Well, back to the story. You can probably guess what happens next. Jesus heals the man. It's over in a moment. Imagine waiting 38 years and it's over in a moment. In fact, the man doesn't even get a chance to learn who Jesus is. The story goes on. We're not going to read about it, but he's like, who was that guy? We didn't even like names and handshakes, and it doesn't even know who he is. But he walks home and he leaves the pool behind forever. And we're going to look at some of the details of that conversation in a little bit. But right now, I want to ask the question. If this is a sign, that's what John calls them. If this is a sign, what is the sign pointing to? This story in particular, what is it pointing to? Because it is pointing to something. Jesus performed many miracles. John only chooses 7. And of those 7, 5 of them are not even mentioned in the other Gospels. So he's carefully curating something to communicate a particular message. Again, I don't want to make too fine of a point of this, but I want to test out a theory for what John is trying to communicate through this particular story. And that this is the theory. The sign is pointing to the fact that new creation is breaking in. Well, that's the name of our sermon series, so maybe that's not too revelatory for you, but let's unpack that a little bit. This is a central fact of your life if you call yourself a Christian. This is an assertion so bold that if it were true, it's going to change your life, and it's going to change absolutely everything. Through Jesus' miracles and his teachings, and yes, his relationships, he brought the future into the present. The new creation, as Jews believed, was the future destination that everything is moving towards. That's where history and the world is moving towards, new creation. That's what they called it. The prophets predicted one day God would make everything well. He would restore what was broken, not destroying the world, but actually transforming it so that things are actually the way they're supposed to be. So that God's dream could finally be realized on earth as it is in heaven. That's what Jesus was doing. He was bringing new creation. He was bringing the future into the present. And pay attention to that second word, creation. That's the word we use to describe the story in the first pages of the Bible. That's a story Paul brought us back to 3 weeks ago with John chapter 1 in the beginning. And I'm going to bring you back there now because there's a little feature to that Genesis 1 and 2 story. I only learned this a few years ago, but when I learned it, it honestly has completely transformed the way I understand what Jesus was up to. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you know how it goes. God makes light and day and night and darkness. And when you finish reading about that, it says, and there was evening and there was morning, day 1. You go on to day 2. God makes the sky and the sea and says, and there was evening and there was morning, day 2. And all the days end that way. He makes land and vegetation, and there was evening and there was morning, day 3. He makes the sun, moon, and the stars, and there was evening and there was morning, day 4. He makes fish and birds, there was evening, there was morning, day 5. He makes animals and people, and there was evening and there was morning, day 6. And when we get to day 7, things are finally complete. Things are the way they should be. God rests and enjoys creation, and what we expect to read is, and there was evening and there was morning, day 7. And it doesn't say that. You've been primed to expect it, and in a stroke of literary genius, the author decides not to put it in. This is surprising. This is intentional, and it's trying to tell you something. It's not an accident. Don't take my word for it. Look it up on your own. But the seventh day doesn't end. It doesn't end. It's ongoing. God rests and enjoys the world because everything is as it should be. Of course, we know that state of rest, that state of completion is lost. And although there are moments in our life when we experience that rest, that joy, that beauty, mostly we struggle with the opposite. Restlessness, brokenness, waiting, yearning for God to make things well again. And all through the story of the Bible, in the midst of the people's restlessness, God is trying to invite the people back to that seventh-day rest. And God gave his people a number of ways to do that. And as I tell you these ways that God encourages his people to enjoy seventh-day rest, think of our story again. The Sabbath day was a practice God told the Jewish people to take on. Every seventh day, you stop and you rest and you enjoy the fact that God will provide. He is providing today, and he will provide ultimately. It's a day set apart to embody God's intention for creation. Remember, our story in John 5 at the pool takes place on a Sabbath day. He also gave them these festivals, 7 a year, almost like super Sabbaths. Every 7 times, 7 days, they'd have an incredible festival celebrating different things, but all of it pointing towards God's providing for them in the wilderness, and God will one day provide for them at the end of time. It points to a future rest. And remember, our story takes place during a festival. We're actually not even told what festival it is. It's not important. What is important is that God wants us to look forward to a time when he will provide fully, a future when all will be well. And he wants us to celebrate that fact, that future, in advance. To celebrate the future in advance. And radically, to actually live now, like you see on the screen, live now like the future has come. Have you ever thought that way? Live now like the future has already arrived. Whatever you think heaven and the new creation will be like, start living that way now. The prophets in the Old Testament described this future in many ways. We're going to take a moment, just soak in the poetry here from Isaiah 35, a very specific image, a confident celebration of what God will do in the future. Let's read some poetry, a glimpse of that future. Isaiah 35, I'll wait for it on the screen. Then, such healing, such repair. The eyes of the blind will be opened. The ears of the deaf will be clear. The lame, that's people that can't walk, will leap like deer excited. They will run and jump tirelessly and gracefully. The stutterer, the stammerer, and the tongue of the mute will sing out loud and clear and joyful song. Waters will pour through the deserts. Streams will flow in God-forsaken lands. Burning sands and hardened wastelands will become pools, there's that word, shimmering with life. The thirsty ground will drink deep from refreshing springs. That's what the future will be like. And it's this picture that I'm sure Jesus had in mind when he comes to Jerusalem on a festival, on a Sabbath, and he's celebrating God's provision, celebrating God's future. And he chooses, of all places, to go behind the temple to the pool of Bethesda, and he walks right up to a man who's been paralyzed for 38 years. You can imagine Jesus bending down, making eye contact, and asking one incredible, soul-searching question. Do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? I mean, what a question. Of course. The man wants to get well. Is this a rhetorical question? I don't know. I mean, this man is at the pool. We know that much about him. In fact, he's been waiting to get well his whole life, right? I don't know why Jesus asked the question, but I feel like there's a whole world contained within it. But I do think that Jesus is sincerely gauging this man's willingness to be well. This man, like you, he's complex. He wants to be well, of course, but you can imagine there'd be some legitimate barriers in his mind that cause him to actually pause and reflect before answering this question. I mean, if he gets well, what does that mean for his life? Lots and lots of good things, of course, but now responsibility, expectations. I mean, honestly, his hope probably died a long time ago, and he didn't actually think he'd be well ever. I mean, there's no chance he's getting in that pool, right? The hope died a long time ago. What it leaves behind, a passive and dull despair. He's grown accustomed to his broken state, his victimhood. And Jesus asks him, and he asks you, do you want to be well? Or does part of you actually feel drawn to keeping things the way they are? I don't want to over-psychologize this man. But the Gospel of John is deep stuff, and it's just inviting you into the question. For the first time in my life, I'm actually seeing a counselor regularly, and the first couple meetings, it's all about setting goals. What are the things you actually want to see in your life? But eventually you move past the setting goals part, and you actually have to make plans and start achieving those goals. And the counselor, asked me this question, well, are you actually willing? Are you actually willing to take steps towards being well? The truth? Yes and no. That's us, right? Yes and no. But the man says neither yes nor no. Take a look. You can go to the next slide. Sir, the man replied, I have no one to help me. No one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Let that sink in. He doesn't answer the question. He doesn't say, yes, I want to be well. He doesn't say, no, I don't want to be well. What I detect here is a profound sadness. When asked whether he wants to be well, the man simply says, I have no one to help me. On the one hand, this is very relevant information. I mean, he's paralyzed. How is he getting into the water? He may have had friends at one point, but they've long gone. Just, again, think of the nasty competition when hundreds of people are watching and waiting for that water. What are the odds you get in first? He's going to be last every time. Can he even get out of the water once he's in? It's scary. On the one hand, you can imagine Jesus being confused when the man responds this way. Jesus, you can imagine him saying, well, listen, that's not what I asked you. What I asked you is, do you want to get well? And the man is certainly not at fault for bringing this up. But it is an excuse. It's a legitimate excuse. But it's an excuse nonetheless, because the question is, do you want to be well? His response begs the question for us. What excuses do we make? What are the ways that we dismiss Jesus' invitation to wholeness because there's that thing in the way? Particularly other people in our life, we can use as excuses for not seeking Jesus. Think back on the man. He says, I've got no one to help me get into the pool. Well, guess what? It was never about the pool. You may have no one to help you get into the pool, but the pool is not going to help you in the first place. This piece of relevant information, he's got no one to help him, it's actually irrelevant in the face of Jesus. Jesus is the friend. He's the true friend of the friendless. He's the hope for the hopeless person. He's the great doctor. He is the source of living water that wells up to eternal life. I'm alone, the man says. Jesus says, no, you're not. I have no friends. Well, I am your friend. Nobody loves me. I love you. Nobody wants me. I want you. Do you want to be well? Because you've been hoping in the wrong thing, and now I'm here. Our excuses for seeking wellness and wholeness in Jesus, they may be valid, but our hope may also be in the wrong place. There are so many things that we use as walls between us and Jesus. So many things we seek to find comfort, happiness, healing in. So many things that we're just waiting for that thing to happen so I can take the next step. Waiting for God to show himself to you before you take a step of faith. Waiting for someone to invite you to a Bible study before you really try to get to know God. You say, maybe once I have this thing figured out, the pieces will align. Once I feel good enough about this part of my life, once I feel healed in this way, then finally I'll be competent enough to start being a Christian or something like this. Maybe I'll give Jesus another shot once the money thing works out. I don't know. But I think the story tells us that Jesus is here right now. So you don't have to wait any longer. Nothing, no person, no thing, no pool will bring the healing and the wholeness like Jesus can. Jesus is inviting this man to receive something, the gift of new creation. You'll see it on the slides, but the gift of new creation requires the choice of new living. You can bring it up there. The gift of new creation requires the choice of new living. No more sitting around and just waiting. No more placing your hopes in superstitions and circumstances. The gift is there. Your choice is to receive it and make decisions about how to live in response. Jesus says to him, now this is verse 8, and we can bring that up on the screen. Then Jesus said to him, listen, you have a decision to make now. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. This has been stated in previous weeks, but John in his gospel actually tells us why he wrote about the signs. At the beginning and end of his gospel, he says something like this. You can go on to the next slide. Jesus performed many other wondrous signs that are not written in this book. These accounts, these stories, they're recorded so that you too might believe that Jesus is the anointed, the liberating King, the Son of God, because believing grants you the life he came to share. That's why you're hearing this story today. So you'll believe. And belief in the Bible is not just mental assent or agreeing with an idea about Jesus in your mind. For the man in the story, belief is not just understanding that he is healed. Belief means standing up, putting his legs to the test, picking up his mat, walking away, leaving the pool, and all that it represents behind him. That's this man's act of belief. In the scriptures, belief is something you do with your whole self, your mind and your body and your will. So I do wonder what God is saying to you today. What's the next step he wants you to take? What does true belief, action, look like for you? So you have all the hope of Jesus' new creation on your side. You're not alone. You have a friend who wants you and loves you and gave himself for you so that you could have the life you long to have. And you could have it to the full. Amen.